Linda to talk about the source of the concept for the Divine Feminine exhibit and how you all decided on it as a theme.
Well, as you mentioned, Maureen, it's an old and honored notion that's been around for a long time, the sacred feminine, the divine feminine. And yet, by the same token, my sense was it's an underappreciated dimension of female spirit. You know, there's grace and wisdom and strength, and the focus seems to be on healing and connection. So it seemed like it was rich for us to explore together. And it seemed like a natural with the 5 of us women coming together, 4 of us, to use that part of ourselves. And it offered, I think, a lot of flexibility to accommodate our different approaches in painting styles and painting subjects. We also found there was a fairly large body of literature, including poetry, that we could use for inspiration. That was pretty much, the idea was good to begin with, and then we just started fleshing it out and seeing where we wanted to go, sharing inspirations.
One of the aspects I really liked a lot was that, and it's very different, is that each of you took a different approach in interpreting the concept, and yet all of it came together in a really nice way. At the same time, each of your works in the exhibit can stand alone. So people can come at it at several different directions, both as a group exhibit and as 4 individual exhibits that happen to have a very cohesive approach. Linda, can you, what do you attribute the cohesion you were able to manage to bring to this? And did you have much back and forth in your discussions about what would work and what wouldn't?
We actually met fairly frequently. I would say every 4 or 5 weeks from the spring into the fall. We started calling them campfires. And initially it was just exploring conceptually and subject matter wise, how are we going to do this? Because we all have different approaches. And then things started to coalesce. We would bring in sketches, we would bring in images that were inspiring to us, elements of poetry and quotations that were inspiring. And then we agreed that it was all going to somehow hang together, even though we were going in a different way. Debbie's not here to talk about it, but her approach was to focus on beautiful floral arrangements, and her sub-theme was vessels. And each of the floral arrangements is contained in a vessel, and that was her approach. So it's
Linda,
she did just join on the phone. Sorry.
I did. I just joined on the phone.
Oh, good,
I'm so
Debbie.
sorry I wasn't able to get on visually, but audioly I can be on here. So I'm so sorry for the delay in getting on.
Well, let's bring you in, and I want to ask you, how long did it really take for you to get this exhibit together and up? Do you have actual time? People always like to know sort of how long it takes for something like this to actually happen.
Oh, well, lifetime, pretty much.
Debbie, that is so true. I'll speak for Debbie as well. Every artist does feel like they put a lifetime of experiences into their work, and everything they've learned and experienced. And for this specific show, we really started a year ahead of time. So we started in the spring of 2019 for planning for the show.
I'd like each of you to speak a little bit about your creative processes, given that your work is different, and whether you felt yourselves impelled or wanting to experiment with new techniques or materials for this exhibit in particular. Why don't we start with Linda?
Well, my approach has evolved in the last few years, where it's what's called intuitive. I start putting paint on paper or canvas, not necessarily knowing how it's going to end up, and kind of finding out what does the paint want to do. But at the same time, I have in the back of my head my inspiration. I want to keep that focus so that helps kind of unconsciously guide what I'm doing and help me find things in what's coming out on the paper that I want to explore a little bit further. And I've been surprised because I found myself doing landscapes in acrylics, and that's pretty much the first time I'd ever done it. I'd done a lot of watercolor, but not so much. And then I found waterfalls were starting to be an aspect. So I think about 5 or 6 of my paintings had waterfalls. It was a surprise.
Deb, what about your creative process and how that affected what you did?
Well, my creative process started with the notion of exploring what divine feminine meant to me individually, and that's as a whole, as an artist, as a mother, as a therapist. Mother Nature and flowers played heavily into that concept, and as well as the idea of women as a containing vessel for those around her.
And Beth?
This process for me is very different than my usual process. And it's because when we first started thinking about this, I think right after we went away for a week at our cabin, which is in a remote place in Virginia. And we had not brought any of my art supplies, and I didn't have access to the internet. And so we were out enjoying the outdoors, and we have a nice little stream down there. And I'm down by the stream, and I just started stacking rocks and making little cairns, little, stacked stones down by the stream. And some of them really reminded me of very feminine forms. And I have painted figuratively before. And that really reminded me of some of the earliest figurative works of art were the Venus figurines. And many cultures had these. And so that I loved that tie-in. So I took pictures, and when I got back to my studio, I was able to, or trying to recreate sort of these stone cairns. And I've been experimenting with a technique that is more pouring acrylic paint. So there's not a whole lot of brushwork in there. I'm actually pouring the paint onto the paper and using heat sometimes and air to see how things dry. And it's got a very watery, they create very watery layers, this technique, which I loved because I loved sort of depicting the solidness of the rocks with the fluidity of the water.
And Elise?
Well, I usually paint spiritual themes, angels, etc., which might have been more of a natural for this show, but I was so intrigued by what my fellow artists were doing. The waterfall, the vessels, the primitive forms. And I started to think, what did this mean to me? And the divine feminine meant relationships, connection. So I thought, well, let's try to do a stab at doing, portraits and doing figures. Although I must say, I think I have 1 or 2 angel ones in there, and I do have a couple of landscapes because of Mother Earth. But I did want to really do women individually, going solo, your relationship with yourself, with a best friend, with a group. Interestingly enough, I did a group of 5 of us, and that's actually the whole number of artists in our group. And I use the technique that I've sort of been developing and I really love, which is alcohol ink on Yupo paper, which is intense color. And then on that, I put acrylic colors to sort of control it, give it shape, give it form. And so my take on it was more traditional, but it was relational.
One of the things I also really liked about the exhibit is that, very unlike a lot of exhibitions that have the artist statement and then just the piece of art, you all 4 of you went further and included as part of the exhibit the sources of your inspiration. And as was said before, that included the poems, cairns, quotations, and more. Beth, I'd like you to address why did everyone decide to include the inspirations?
Well, for this show in particular, it was so important to us, our meetings, our process, and working through it together as a group. We spent so much quality time sort of bouncing our ideas off of each other and giving each other inspiration that we thought it would be really interesting for viewers to see some of that process and what we were thinking and what goes on in the minds of artists.
And Deborah, what about you?
Well, it just felt important. The exhibit and the process was very, very meaningful for me. And adding the inspirations was a way to express that meaning. I see painting as a meditative process that is crafted in the same way that a poet crafts her poem or a dancer drafts her moves. Each stroke holds concentration and meaning for me, and I really felt it important to express that through the quotes from the poems.
I thought it was a great orientation for viewers as well. And I certainly appreciated the poems from Mary Oliver that you included. Elise, how did this get presented when you were on the wall with the exhibits?
Well, we printed them out on cardstock and we put them next to our physical paintings, along with another card, which is the title card, the name of the painting and the medium, etc. And so it was a real gestalt. I mean, it was just, we really wanted it to be a full experience for the viewer, visually, kind of intellectually, in terms of words. We really wanted to make an impact, an emotional impact on the participants there. And ironically, we did show this, as mentioned, in Gallery Underground. We had a Friday night opening. Someone could spend an awful long time there just looking at the paintings, reading at everything that we had. And they did. We had great attendance. We were really, really lucky. We couldn't wait to move on to your church. But we showed, like I said, the first Friday in March. And starting on Monday, the gallery was closed down. And it was closed down for months and just recently, reopened.
Mm-hmm. Deb, how do you think the documented inspirations not only serve the exhibit, but the viewers?
Well, the inspirations along with the artwork actually help explain who I am as an artist as well as a person. That's the thing about art. It's impossible, and at least for me, to separate myself consciously or unconsciously from what I produce.
Mm-hmm. And Beth, what about you?
I think the inspirations add a depth of knowledge to the viewer about how an artist might go about interpreting a theme. And I, as a viewer, I appreciate finding out that, about other artists as well. So I think it makes the exhibit more than just a visual presentation. It adds a deeper level to that.
And Linda, were you able to observe in that time period that it was on the wall, your viewers' reactions?
That was the nice part. I actually had a lot of friends there that night for the reception, and it was exciting to see people spending the time to not only look at the painting, but to study the titles, some of which were long, and then the comment about the inspiration for the painting, and then go back and look at the painting again. And for me, that kind of pause is an opportunity. We can engage the viewer and give them a different lens to look at the painting and to see something different, something that from our mind, as Debbie said, a little bit about who we are, what caused us to be inspired to create it. So it was exciting to hear people talk about that and really spend some time looking for that connection between the words of the text and the paintings themselves.
And Linda, let's go into that a little bit further. What extent do you think those inspirations really affected what and how you created?
Well, I spent a lot of time looking for quotations about the divine feminine, the sacred feminine, looking for poetry. I think I bought about 10 books, just kind of scouring, looking for sometimes elements I would use for titles or something that might appear visually. And as I mentioned, I keep those thoughts in my mind when I'm actually putting my brush to the paper. And what I discovered is in two of the paintings in the exhibit, there were figures that emerged that I didn't plan on painting. I just stepped back one time, looked and thought, oh, there's a face there, or there's a seated figure. And that helped me decide what the title was going to be. And in both cases, I did a tiny little bit of enhancement just to bring it out, but it wouldn't be obvious. You have to look at it to really see it. And that was really exciting to feel what I had in my head was coming forth, emerging into the painting.
And Elizabeth, since you use poetry, which can be both an oral and a visual, or have both an oral and visual function, how did that affect what you did?
I think that's probably Debbie. That was me.
Yeah,
Debbie, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
yeah, yeah. Well, the inspiration, the term divine feminine, totally influenced what I painted. The Mary Oliver quotes went hand in hand with the paintings. I've read a lot of her poetry in the past and reread a lot in conjunction with this show. And sometimes the favorite quotes inspired the paintings, and then other times the paintings, I would go back over and find a quote that went along with it. I titled all of the paintings with a quote from Mary Oliver. And some of my friends actually who had seen the paintings said that the titles absolutely influenced how they saw the painting.
Mm-hmm. As you've all mentioned, at one point or another, you had the show on the walls at Gallery Underground. I believe is that in Clarendon, Elise, or Crystal City?
That's in Crystal City.
Crystal City, now known as National Landing, I believe, since the Amazon arrived. And then all of a sudden the pandemic hit and everybody's plans went in all directions. We know that the virus is going to be around for quite a while, and we're all trying to grapple with all those changes, including us at the church. We went to an online function instead of on the walls. What concerns did any of you have about migrating from the actual space to the virtual space? How about you, Beth?
At first, it seemed like taking an exhibit to a virtual experience seemed like it might be more limiting because you miss seeing, as Linda talked about, your face-to-face reactions and people seeing things face-to-face. But we also knew there would be some advantages because you would reach a wider audience, and viewers might have time to come back and take things in their own time at their own speed instead of feeling rushed. You know, I have 5 minutes to go to the gallery to look at that. They could come back, and it was presented so beautifully that I feel like the exhibit online there's added a lot of depth.
And Deb?
Knowing that so many things in art exhibits included are going to be going online now, I was really interested in how it was going to be pulled together. The way the show's presented on the St. Michael's website took away any concerns that I had. It's just really beautiful.
And what were your reactions, Beth, on seeing it up? You sort of hinted at it already, but
yeah, it was just, Maureen, it was a revelation to me. You did such a fantastic job of organizing it in such a way that, I mean, I saw the exhibit on the walls, but I just saw it in a whole new light because you were able to, I love the way you presented it, that you could go to the tabs and find out more information about the inspirations and then go back to the paintings. So it was wonderful, and it caused me to see it in much more cohesive light.
And I want to give Beth, our priest, kudos here because she actually did the hands-on work of putting it up. I sent the files to her, so we've both been learning a little bit as we go along with doing it this way. And Elise, how about you when you saw it for the first time online?
I like the fact that all the images were the same size because in a physical gallery, the paintings are different sizes. It depends on where it's hung, who it hangs next to. it can really have a lot of variation, but in this online presentation, every painting had equal weight. And I thought that was, really a nice way to do it. And I just, and I was lucky enough to be in your prior online exhibition, so I knew that this would be quite stunning. So, but it's a great experience. And, all artists like exposure, with the online world and the Zoom world, we can hopefully, get our paintings and our creations shown in a much wider universe.
Beth, is there anything that you particularly miss that the show is not presented traditionally?
Well, I think we've all sort of touched on it, but being able to interact personally with viewers, and whether it's, as Linda was saying, friends who who are coming to the exhibit to support you, or are meeting new people who are moved by your works or see something in there that really touches them. So that's still one missing part, I think.
How about you, Deb?
Well, along with Beth, I really do miss the people and the receptions and being able to interact with the viewers. We're there during the reception, so people can ask questions, or we can ask questions of them when we see them respond. It's a different experience, not better or worse, just different.
Mm-hmm. And while we know that at some point, or we're hoping certainly that the coronavirus goes its way and leaves us getting back to some kind of normal, do you see the virtual exhibits as something you want to keep in your futures as artists, both generally and more specifically about what's going on out in the world, the art world now, because everything has gone online for the most part, although the museums are starting to open back up. But the experience is still different given the limitations. So I'm curious to know, and let's hear from Beth and then Deb and Elise about this, what you think about the virtual exhibits and their future.
Oh, I think they're here to stay. Hopefully, as you say, Maureen, in conjunction with perhaps live viewing, but it really has opened the doors to new ways to view art exhibits. And hopefully we've all taken advantage of some of the wonderful, museum exhibits that are out there that are online. And maybe in California, or maybe in Europe, or maybe in Vienna, at least, that you don't have to actually travel and be there. So I think it's opened up all sorts of new possibilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Beth. I definitely think that the virtual exhibit's here to stay, and that's for many reasons, the pandemic being just one of them. I think virtual exhibits do reach a larger audience, which is nice, and it reaches more people geographically, as well as people who are, not willing to go to a gallery, or people who are stuck at home taking care of kids. It opens up a whole new area for us.
And how about you, Elise?
Well, I like both formats, and I hope both, are here to stay. Interestingly enough, I think the online format may offer more opportunities for experimentation and creativity for artists. When you set about doing a show in a bricks and mortar gallery, there is a lot of time and expense involved in terms of taking your work, matting it, framing it, having arrangements with the gallery, getting a time slot, scheduling an opening, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, and this is what, of course, is required for professional artists. But it's interesting to think then about some of the possibilities of more maybe quickly showing your work online, or also being aware that when you do show online, you really do have to come up with the physical, specs involved, the dimensions and that sort of thing. I don't know if we did that with this one exactly, but it's good news to know about for the future. So both, I think, have a big role for artists.
for those who are wondering, we did have one of you who automatically included the dimensions. And I thought about going back to the other three of you, but we really wanted to get this going, so I didn't do that. Typically, I do ask for the dimensions, and probably it gives some people a better perspective on the size and the depth and that kind of thing. Deb, tell us what you think your feelings are about what viewers' takeaways are from the Divine Feminine.
I'm hoping that they're the same as what I take away from it. And that's the idea of feminine power and energy, hope, continuity in history, divine feminine past, present, and future, all encompassing.
Mm-hmm. And how about you, Beth?
I hope that the viewers take away the ways that them think about the ways divine feminine have touched their lives, and I hope it makes people even pause and think about what does that mean? What does the divine feminine mean to them?
Mm-hmm. And I think for us, maybe something to think about is how we might capture viewers' remarks about the exhibits that we show. We're on a new platform. The first exhibit on the new platform was the pandemic show. And I continue to think about different things about all these shows and how we might present them and what we might do with them, as does Beth. And so that's a good thing to think about is really what the takeaways are and how they come to it through the means of a faith community. And I want to ask each of you individually, and let's just start with Beth. What's next for you, both as the individual artist and as part of this collective?
Well, during the stay-at-home time, I've been working. I've actually had a few commissions, which are fun for me. Some artists don't enjoy commissions. I do. I was a graphic designer, so I'm used to working with somebody else's visions sometimes. And so one of my pieces was quite a large piece, and I usually work in medium size or small, so this was quite large, and I really enjoyed it. It was a challenge, so I'm hoping that I can experiment some more on a larger scale. And then we do have, and I think I'll let Debbie come up and tell what we're doing, collectively, because we have some exciting news coming up collectively too. So,
okay, Deb.
Yeah, well, I think that Elise actually might be better to talk about what we're doing as a group together. But individually, I have been painting a day for years now, and some of them are real tiny. But it's a practice that I'm continuing throughout this time. I find that I can experiment with lots of different styles and media, as well as explore different subject matter if I continue doing that. I can find inspiration just about anywhere. But I'm really inspired about this new project we have coming up that we'll let Elise talk about.
Before we bring on Elise for that part of it and for her own opinions about her individual, being an individual artist, how about you, Linda?
Well, when the pandemic started, I quick ordered about a dozen small stretched canvases, 12 by 12, 11 by 14, and I've gotten 8 of those done. So I'm going to finish those up. And I'm not used to working quite that small, and stretch canvases is a slightly different way of playing with the paint. So that's been fun. So I do a lot of combining collage and paint, making papers, stamping papers, and putting it together in my abstracts. I've also got another 9 months to go in my tenure as president of Potomac Valley Watercolors. We had to cancel a lot of our in-person activities in the spring, a workshop, a show, a luncheon. We've also canceled the fall. And I found what I fell into was doing every 3 weeks an email to all of our almost 200 artists, kind of catching them up, inspirations of things I'd found, something funny to laugh at, maybe some news about what people are doing, like our online show, to share. And I'll be continuing that as well into the spring.
And Elise, let's close out with your views.
Okay. Individually, I'm spending the summer out in Portland, Oregon, a mile away from my two grandsons and my son and my wonderful daughter-in-law. And in terms of painting, I just painted a cat poster, 3 owls, and a big montage of volcanoes and the fire goddess for my grandsons. They're all in sort of thing. So anyway, other than that, we're taking a lot of walks and hikes in the mountains and seeing beautiful Mount Hood and Mount Tabor. 2 weekends ago, we went through lavender fields with the mountains in the background. And I thought, oh boy, I really have to paint this. This is going to come out somehow. So it's just been a beautiful experience to kind of enrich the senses, take a little break from my normal style of painting. And I head back to Virginia on August 20th, and I look forward to getting started again. Now, collectively, we all just came up with a theme for our next group show, and the theme is ambient light.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means, it's a photographic term, it's a design term, but it's also kind of a philosophical term. It means available light. And we were thinking during this pandemic time that, you know, we've sort of had, our worlds have sort of shrunk. We've had to appreciate what is available. You know, the relationships, our homes, are what we've had to do to survive during this time. And ambient light, again, has lots of means of interpretation. I'm sure all 4, there might be another artist, Kat Jameson, we hope. 5 of us will come up with our own style of doing that. But I foresee a lot of nature paintings and probably some abstract too. So it's a very exciting challenge. And just in terms of mechanics, we are going to start showing our work in an ongoing way at a gallery in Arlington, and that is Sterling Framing and Gallery on Lee Highway. And the owner, Chuck Kipp, is working with us. So we will have our paintings hanging there on a regular basis. So, and Maureen, I think you've gone to Sterling many times.
Yes.
You know those wonderful guys there.
They're great.
I will just let maybe some of the other artists also talk about what they see in terms of ambient light. Linda?
Oh, I think you captured it as well as anybody could. If you know the paintings of Georges de Latour, I've always been impressed how he might have hidden light on someone's hand, and obviously there's like a candle behind it, and you see the light reflected on the faces or the objects behind, but you don't see the source of the light. And that intrigues me a lot. So I don't know if I'll be able to recapture that, but we'll see.
That's great. Yeah. What about you, Elizabeth?
For me, it's, you know, ambient light means looking for the light that's there. We are in dark times, things, you know, are beyond our control, but there's always some ambient light, and where is it? And we have to look and find it, each of us individually. And I'm very excited to see what, you know, my other artists come up with, and our viewing audience, you know, what their reactions are to our paintings and our interpretations of that.
And how about you, Deb?
Well, I've been finding myself drawn to looking up at the trees and seeing light filtering through leaves, and not necessarily paying attention to the shadows on the ground, but more up in the sky. So I'm playing around with that idea. I'm not sure if that's the direction I'm going to go in, but it does talk to the light that's around us, that's there for us. So that, at least that's the direction I'm going in now. We will probably be hanging this show in March at Gallery Underground. At least that's the plan now. And hopefully things will be clearing up and we'll be able to have a reception and in-person show. But so it's going to be taking up a lot of my emotional energy thinking about this.
Well, that's great. And I want to thank each of you before we check to see what viewer questions there might be, to thank each of you for doing this today. And also to just say it's been a real pleasure to work with you individually and as a collective. Everything was very smooth this time around, and I had absolutely no complaints about how it got going and where we went with it. And I've been really pleased with the response to it so far. Do we know, Beth, if we have questions?
So I'm going to stop recording. That'll be the first thing.